Thank you so much for joining for today's Legal Network for Gender Equity webinar, Conducting Client-Centered and Trauma-Informed Consultations. I'm Lizzie Vogel. I'm Senior Counsel at the Legal Network for Gender Equity team at the National Women's Law Center. And I'm thrilled to welcome you all today to learn about this really important topic from our fantastic presenters. A few housekeeping notes. As you may have just heard, today's webinar is being recorded. You can find recordings and slides from most of our past webinars and other resources on our website. Danny's going to add the link to that chat, and the recording from this webinar and the slides will be also up at that link within the next week or so. About the slides for today's presentation, you may have a Zoom, on your Zoom screen, you may have a message from the application AHA Slides, which is asking you to accept a feature that will allow you to see the slides. So please make sure you click to accept that if you can't see the slides. If they also initially appear really small, you can toggle that part of the screen left and right to make the slides appear bigger. You also, if you interact in the chat, the slides may go away. You can just click that message again to bring them back. If you have any issues with any of this, feel free to message me in the chat, and I will be actively on duty to make sure folks can see the slides and access the information that they need. As I just mentioned, we'll have the chat function and the Q&A function available today. Our presenters have dedicated time at the end to answer your questions. There's also lots of interactive components, so we really hope that you will use all of those features to engage with today's presentation. I want to extend my sincere thanks to those of you who helped make today possible. So first, to our attorneys in the Legal Network for Gender Equity, thank you for being here today and for all the work you do on behalf of survivors and for your commitment to doing this in a trauma-informed way. Thank you to my colleagues at the Law Center, Danny Stewart and Jennifer Mondino, for your help with today's webinar. Thank you to our fantastic presenters who will introduce themselves momentarily, but Naida Hanau and Benny Del Castillo from Volare. We're really grateful for our continued partnership with your organization and the wisdom you continue to share with us about how to thoughtfully and empathetically advocate for and work with survivors. So on that note, Naida and Benny, I'll pass it to you to get us started.
Thank you so much, Lizzie. It's been so wonderful to work with the National Women's Law Center, and we're really excited to see you all today. Like Lizzie mentioned, my name is Naida Hanau, and I'm the head of engagement at Volare, and my pronouns are she, hers, and I'm here today with my colleague, Benny.
Everyone, nice to either see you, your names, whatever way you come, that's okay. My name is Benny. I'm Volare's engagement manager, and I'm excited to get this started.
And so just a little bit about what you're going to experience today. Benny and I are here as an interdisciplinary team. I was a staff attorney at Volare and did a lot of client work, and Benny was an advocate. So we've both done so many intakes, both together and individually, and that's going to color a lot of our information today, a lot of the way that we approach the work. And so please feel free to ask questions throughout or reserving questions at the end, but just wanted to give you a little bit more of like who we were and like why we're doing this presentation with you all today. So very excited to get started. As Lizzie mentioned, if you are having any difficulties with the slides or engaging, please let us know, although I see that many of you have already hopped on. So happy to get started. So today's discussion, we're going to focus on sharing some information, some of the basics of the neurobiology of trauma and its impacts, kind of talking through a framework of how to approach an intake, some best practices, both in language and maybe the structure of the intake as well. And finally, we are going to go through some examples. And these examples were taken from you all. Some of you all shared examples of things that you were struggling with in intakes in a survey, and also just from kind of word of mouth of concerns that you all may have shared individually. And so hopefully these examples are going to feel really relevant to you all, and we'll talk through them as a group, just so that we can really get some audience interaction and kind of see where the struggles that you are facing are throughout these intake processes. So just a little bit about the organization that we're with. Volare serves survivors of any type of crime, from sexual assault to homicide, elder abuse, gun violence, etc. We provide free, holistic, trauma-informed legal advocacy and therapeutic services. As I mentioned earlier, I'm an attorney, Benny is an advocate. And finally, we really approach our work through the lens of survivor-defined justice, meaning that we don't tell survivors the right or the wrong way to react to a crime, and instead ask them to define justice for themselves and take their lead as we work through them and in support with our services. So just some more housekeeping notes on language. Benny and I are very accustomed to using the term survivor, since it does capture the majority of population that we work with. That may or may not be the appropriate term based on the folks that you're working with on the call. So we might be flip-flopping between survivor or intake or other terminology. But of course, we always want to use the language that whoever we're talking with is using in that moment. Also, just a little disclaimer, you see this little asterisk on the slide that says that whenever we are talking about case examples that may be graphic or may be a trauma cue for anyone, you'll see that little asterisk on the slides, and we just want to be mindful for any folks who have trauma experience. And if you want to go off camera, take a break, we don't take it personally. Again, just want to give a heads up for folks. And lastly, if you need any support, if you are cute or anything else, please feel free to reach out to us. We're here for you. And as we'll talk about a little bit, right, this work can impact you as well. And so it's really important to take care of oneself. Okay, so first engagement question. And it's very exciting to, again, have you all here, but we also know that we have a lot of experience, but know that everyone here in this virtual room have experience as well. So just want to get a sense about your background, your experience, and this is doing client intakes generally. Are you fresh out of law school? Have you been doing this for decades? And then the next slide will ask you specifically about your experience with doing consultations with a network. So seeing here, a lot of 0 to 1 years, but also seeing the other end, 10+ years of experience. Okay, so we have a lot of experience in the room. This is wonderful. And so next, how long have you been conducting consultations with the legal network specifically? And a good variety, wonderful. Great, thank you all so much for answering. Again, really helpful for us to know that there's a variety of experience levels in the room, and we'll be sure to be able to provide tips that apply to everyone. Any, should we move forward? So this question is more open-ended. What are you hoping to get out of today's training? As I mentioned before, Benny and I have spoken to Lizzie already, and had kind of gotten some anecdotal information about what people have been identifying as struggles in the past. We've also answered some surveys, but just hearing it straight from you right now live, again, what are you looking to get from this training? Caveat that Benny and I will do our best to try to give that to you. So just sharing some of the answers: to become the best listener I can be, to be more attuned to how to interact with clients who have experienced trauma, learn skills to better support clients in trauma, and also tips to balance and manage attorney stress from supporting severely traumatized clients. Yes, wonderful, Betsy. How to be better at my job, how to balance getting the information you need efficiently during an intake while also being caring and thoughtful. I don't want clients to be triggered by things I say or ask. I've been an employment attorney for a long time, but I'm new to dealing with survivors of trauma. Wonderful. Any tips and strategies for working in a trauma-informed manner with clients from the first interaction in order to serve them best, informed, positively. Wonderful. Thank you all so much for sharing. These all feel really manageable. I think that we're going to cover a lot of these today. So with that being said, Betty, did you want to get us started?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, thanks again for participating, everyone. So I thought we could get started just with an overview of like some best practices that have been proven to be best when working with survivors of trauma, right? And I do want to note, like Naida and I are very well aware that when we're doing intakes, I have done intakes for years at various organizations. Like when we're talking about building trust and rapport, some folks may think, okay, I have like 10 minutes, 30 minutes, 60 minutes. So we are very aware of that. We want to name that. And also we do think some of this can be applicable even if you have 2 minutes with someone, right? Because building that trust and rapport, for example, with trust, it's basically doing what you say you're going to be doing. And that can be accomplished in really short amounts of time or over years of working with them, right? Like I've accomplished that doing a 60-minute intake, and I've accomplished that when working with a survivor for 2-3 years. So just want to frame it that way. And the rapport is also, I think, acknowledging that the other person is a fellow human on this earth with interests, with likes, with dislikes, right? That go beyond maybe survivorship in that way or their experiences of trauma or harm. And then the respectful approach, right? And that I think, and all of you have so much experience being respectful and again, seeing a human as a human being, being mindful, and we'll speak about specific skills that could help us with this and how to show that. I think the culture aspect here is also really important. That does not mean we need to know everything about everyone and their background. Absolutely not. But knowing that it exists, I think that's an amazing first step. Again, especially if we have a short amount of time, is like how are our biases influencing us, recognizing that we do have biases. I am humbled each day. I'm like, yep, I still have a bias after working in this field for many, many years. And then always advocating for choice, for folks to make choices. Again, we're going to dive deep into exactly what that can literally look like in short amounts of time in one single conversation. But we, as Naida spoke about with survivor-defined justice, that's exactly what we mean by that. The folks should have that autonomy, that agency to make decisions about what they would like to do or not want to do. All right, y'all, so I'm not gonna lie. Sometimes when we do these presentations, we talk about trauma we could do it for hours. So this is a more condensed version, but I'm gonna explain more of the most key takeaways I'd like for all of you, right? I do wanna say, and this is on us, I forgot to add an asterisk to this slide, so I wanna say that verbally, that I am gonna use the case example in a couple minutes, okay? So just as a heads up for folks. So this is a quote by Dr. Chandra Bloom, and this is really what everyone kind of goes to, right? Especially the first line, too much, too fast, too soon. And really, when even I first learned about trauma, it was often taught to me like, oh, here's a list of things that are traumatic experiences. And I think all of us can kind of agree that's typically how people talk about trauma. Even in the DSM, which is for like more therapists, psychologists, right, psychiatrists, or even just like when we take a class on it, like, yes, these are typically what happens. So I will say that when we're talking about trauma, if you take one thing away, is that trauma is not defined by the event. It is defined by the person experiencing it, right? And this becomes really, really critical. So one example we like to use is actually a research study, a longitudinal research study about 2 8-year-old boys. And one, I believe they were siblings or neighbors, apologies. And one 8-year-old boy, unfortunately, was molested by an adult. When that was happening, the other 8-year-old boy was not molested, but was forced to watch this occur. And so they followed both these 8-year-old boys as they grew into adults. And what they found was, what they were looking for was like resiliency, right? The outcomes of their lives, how would this impact them? And what they found was that the 8-year-old boy who had experienced molestation had pretty strong like resiliency and support systems, what have you. The other 8-year-old boy didn't. And this really stumped people, especially researchers and folks regarding trauma. And the reason is we often have in our heads of, You have to directly experience something, and that something has to meet a certain level or standard, right? It has to look a certain way. There has to be physical contact, right? There has to be the standard we have. And this research study really challenges all of us to think about that trauma, again, it's not about the event. The survivor who witnessed this act experienced trauma, right? They were not touched, but there was still harm caused. And so this was really, again, and through the years, we have developed our own learning of what trauma is. And essentially, it's a threatening situation. And I always like to uplift this word of hopelessness. And that hopelessness doesn't have to be, I am now hopeless for months at a time and I have a diagnosis. No, it could be 2 seconds of hopelessness where someone thinks this is going to happen and there's nothing I can do to stop it. I often use the example of a car crash. That moment, if you've ever been in an accident, that moment, it could be, again, 2 seconds where you're like, it's going to happen, and I just have to let it happen. There's nothing I can do. That type of hopelessness. The other part I want to uplift when we're talking about trauma that feels really, really critical, especially for the roles you all hold, is that, again, through research, we have found that it's not only the event, it's the after, right? So through studies, and I even have many personal experiences of working with survivors, how folks react to a survivor disclosing or sharing their story determines if they will ever seek assistance again, right? And we often talk about, for example, first responders, the ambulance, right? Fire department, police, detectives. People think like automatically, oh, the first 20 minutes. And yes, that is 1,000% true. And what we also, I think, sometimes miss is that people can wait many years to disclose. So if you're still that first person or second person, right, or third person, like all of us, YALSers included, could be one of the first people that this person is speaking to about their experience. And I don't mean to say, oh my God, there's so much pressure on you now, be nervous. I actually like to frame it in, you'll have a power to make an impact, right? A huge, huge impact on someone's life by being able to hold space for them. Again, we're going to provide some tools on how best to do that, because we also have the power to cause further harm. So, and this has been shared by many survivors I've worked with, for example, in therapy, where I've had a survivor tell me, my mom didn't believe me. My friend asked me why I went out, right? When those types of things are communicated, it unfortunately can impact the path of healing for a survivor. That was a lot on trauma. So I do want to say, of course, anyone interrupt me, chat or anything, and I'm happy to talk further. So now, just like the slide says, I'm gonna focus on the initial crisis. Again, right, this is focusing on that like 24, 48, even a week type after a traumatic experience. And when I do that, I'm gonna start on the stress reaction. So as you see here in the slide, right, we all of us have a stress spectrum. All of us hold that. And you see these two symbols that are really two extremes within that stress spectrum. That symbol that looks like an explosion on my right when I'm looking at the slide, right? That could be someone, and I actually do this all the time. Like, let's say you're in an office or something and you walk in, someone's already there, maybe doing their work on their laptop, and you say, Naida, and Naida like jumps halfway off their seat and they're like a little startled. They're like, oh my God. That is really one extreme. And again, it could be an extreme. So typically it's identified as hypervigilance, right? And even just looking at that first part of that word, that hyper, like that arousal state, always being on alert, always almost waiting for the other shoe to drop, always being like something is going to happen. I need to be prepared. As soon as I hear something, I'm ready, right? On the other extreme, we have that X, that extreme, a fancy word for it is dissociation. And that's folks who may do the opposite. Instead of being like, they close in, shut down. Right? And you can actually see this where, actually, through a lot of my work with survivors, but also others, when you're talking to someone, they're physically there, but they mentally have gone somewhere else. You can even see it in their eyes. It's like often looking far off. They're not present. They're not there in that moment. Some folks describe this as even being in the ceiling looking down at themselves, right? So again, other extreme. And what happens is, again, all of us are on the spectrum, and that purple circle is like where we're kind of hanging out when we're feeling, okay, you know what, some things happen, some things maybe stressing me out, but I can come back to this middle, right? Like I have the resources, ideas, beliefs that I can come back here. Right? So even when something stressful happens, and maybe we're moved, now that you can go to the next slide, and even we're moved to one side or the other, essentially what's happening, right? Like in this case, we're moved more toward the hypervigilance, like, oh, I'm on the edge of my seat a little bit, a little activated, perhaps, maybe my heart's racing a little bit. But again, typically with stress, we're able to come back, right? So a good example of this is if I'm in traffic, and this has happened to me, and I am running late because I have to do a presentation and I'm like, I'm not going to make it. Like you just know, oh my, I'm not going to make it. There is no way, if anyone's driven in New York or California, you know this, right? You're not going to make it. That would cause me a whole lot of stress, right? But then our brains have this map almost made of different puzzle pieces. And each puzzle piece could be a different resource or belief or based on our experience. So for example, it could be, okay, I'm not going to make it. I'm super stressed. And this puzzle piece is my manager is so understanding. I know that if I text them right now, they'll understand and they'll be able to support me. Or, okay, I actually remember someone else being late and it seemed okay. So I feel like based on that experience, I'm going to be fine. Right? Or let me call my friend because I need a support to calm me down, right? So all these different aspects would technically allow me to still stay in that equilibrium, basically, right? And become a little bit okay. Trauma is different because trauma is like throwing a bomb at that puzzle and those pieces are scattered everywhere. And so now when I'm sitting in traffic, I have no way to get back to that middle. I have nothing to tell me that I will be okay. I have that belief, that idea of safety, of calmness, of security, of stability is gone, right? That's the experience of folks who've experienced trauma. And I always say, because we're all humans and we may have inside thoughts that we don't say, but typically what we have heard from folks is being like, why is that person overreacting? Why are they now shouting? Like the pen didn't work. Why are they throwing it? Right? And because a fancy way of talking about this concept I just laid out is a window of tolerance. Quite literally like the word tolerance, right? How much can we tolerate before we're like, oh my God, okay, I can no longer do this. And so it can become really, really, really small for folks who've experienced trauma, especially complex trauma, i.e. throughout their life. Right. So for someone, and I've had this happen actually at the hospital, I used the pen example on purpose. We were actually giving them forms to sign and they tried a pen and it wasn't working and they threw it. Was that caused because a pen wasn't working? No, right? Something traumatic had just occurred and they were not able to get back on that equilibrium to feel any form of safety, right? And then we had that reaction. So just as, again, a reminder, more often than not, it can often be, unfortunately, a consequence of experiencing trauma and how the brain kind of deals with it. All right. So that was like that super, very quick rundown of that initial crisis, right? The very, very initial crisis. Now we're going to do a very quick long term. I'm using this in quotes because, again, we recognize y'all are not working with folks long term. But in the next slide, you're going to see that what you may see that often appears for survivors long term is this re-experiencing of an event. Another concept under that is overgeneralization of danger. So very quick example is if someone experiences, unfortunately, a house fire, right? For a lot of folks, their instinct, our brain telling us, have y'all heard of fight, flight, freeze, fawn, right? For most people, it's going to be flight, like you're running, right? So let's say someone decides to do that. House fire, they're running to safety. 10 years later, that smell of smoke is so distinct. And that person smells that smell of smoke of something burning, and they may start running. And the reason is because our brain is so smart and wants us to survive so much that it only needs about a 20% overlap in memory for it to send danger signals. And now we think it's happening all over again. And that could be a smell, that could be perfume or cologne, that could be a color, that could be facial features. And the tough part to accept is we, as folks who work with survivors, may be that trauma cue, that overlap where the brain's going, hey, this is so similar. I think we're in danger. And I think we need to respond how we responded when we were in danger last. Maybe that's running, maybe that's fighting, maybe that's freezing or fawning, right? And if anyone wants like further conversations about that, we're happy to support after. But just wanted to give that overview before we dive into more tangible skills.
Alrighty, so now we're getting into the intake framework. So before even beginning to talk about like kind of like the steps that an intake's gonna take, we thought that it was important to just start off with the very foundational question of like, what is the purpose of the intake? And that may change from intake to intake. I think really listening to the person and kind of getting a sense of what are their goals? Are they looking to you to explain a process? Like what happens if, I file a complaint? What happens if I go to the police? Are they looking for a very specific question like, is my claim still valid under the statute of limitations? And trying to get a sense of like, what is this person coming to you for? And the reason I say that, because it makes them very odd. You're like, obviously I need to understand what they're coming to you for. But sometimes we will take what we interpret the purpose of the intake should be and add our own agenda, add our own biases, or maybe even decide like, what, actually what they really should be asking me is this. And so I'm going to talk about that instead. And part of what the presentation is today is being able to check yourself and be like, I need to slow down. That's not what they asked. That's not what they're coming to me for. And despite what I think may be best or more strategic, etc., I need to really center what it is that they're telling me they want to talk about and stay there. And we'll touch upon that throughout the rest of the presentation as well. But then, okay, so now you know that, and you're like, okay, this is what they want to talk about. How is that going to impact you and how you're going to approach the intake, right? And we'll talk about skills to do that. But really thinking to yourself, asking to yourself, but also to the person, maybe explicitly out loud, if what it is that they want to know, because maybe the reason that they initially thought they wanted a consultation has changed since then. So one of the foundational things is going to kind of be to gauge what it is that they're looking for and framing everything in that way. I'm going to turn over to them for this slide.
Yeah, before Naida dives deep into this, we wanted to start with a little activity here, right? So I want everyone to look at this staircase image here. To me, first word is that looks shady, right? Super shady, dark, not well lit, looks like those steps maybe could not handle much, right? And I want y'all to imagine you are at the bottom of that staircase. I'm next to you. and I say, hey, can you go up and turn the light switch on? It's at the top of the stairs. That's one, right? Versus, what if I said, hey, can you go up the stairs and turn the light switch on? You're going to take 6 steps. And on that 6th step on your right, waist height, reach out and you're going to find a railing. Take 4 more steps. You're going to reach the landing. And on your left, if you put your hand out, the light switch will be right there. So I want to ask, and feel free to unmute, shout it out, or think just internally, how is that different? How was that received and heard differently?
May imagine that was a metaphor for what we're going to talk about today. But to Benny's question, really, the difference is that if you know what to expect from a process, it can make a difference in how you're experiencing it. Maybe it doesn't make that staircase significantly less scary, but it will be less scary if you know what you can expect. If there's someone who is kind of, laid out, okay, well, like if you go up this number of stairs, you can hang on to the handrail, and that's what we're looking to do with an intake. It is so much easier for someone to be able to manage a lot of the cues that they're going to experience if they know what is coming. And so instead of, Erin, I see you, instead of kind of starting an intake and launching into your plan, your agenda at your speed for your amount of time, it can make such a positive difference for someone to know exactly what's going to happen. And we'll go into detail. Erin, did you have a question?
A comment, if that's okay. Yeah. So I as soon as I saw that staircase, it resonated because one of the things I repeat in every intake, and actually then throughout my contact with a client, is I use the metaphor of, hey, we're going to take it one step at a time, right? Let's not get ahead of ourselves. You only need to know this is the next step. I'm gonna be there right with you, and it's always a relief for them. I mean, because it is overwhelming. They don't know what to expect. And so I like that framing too for the intake itself. Hey, we have this agenda, but we're going to get through each one. We don't, and I often say, look, you don't need to rush. I know you have a lot of things you want to say, but we're going to take it one thing at a time and we're going to get through it all. We're not going to end this call with you feeling like you didn't get to share what you want to share. So that really resonated, and I think it's a good framing.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing, Erin. Yeah, again, like really laying out for folks. And I think, especially from a perspective of sharing legal advice, one of the the things that comes up frequently is, right, when do I get to share information? People are very eager to just dive into it, and we don't want to get through all the explanations about privilege and confidentiality, right? But those things are important. And so one of the ways that we can balance, again, that urge from our end to like, I need to get through some admin things first, is by simply sharing, today I'm going to go over some administrative information that I have to share. I want to talk to you about how your information is protected during this conversation. I want to know how you heard about me, kind of prompting to make sure that they came to you through the network. I'm also going to then ask you some questions about what happened. And then, as we're going through those questions, if you also want to like ask me any questions of your own, I'm happy to do that. We'll have approximately 30 minutes, an hour, however much time, so that they know from the outset that like, okay, we're not going to be on the phone for 3 hours, right? And something that we'll talk about later is that not only laying that agenda, but also setting the boundaries of like, this is when we're going to start, this is when we're going to end, if you need to take breaks or pauses, etc. All of that is also boundary setting, which is very important, because I know that I often struggle with like, you want to give people all the time and energy in the world, but you can't, right? I know that we were talking about vicarious trauma earlier, or the impact that these intakes can take. You're doing this because you're trying to help folks, but at the same time, one of the ways to be most helpful is to be transparent, right? Benny said before how trust is about like keeping the promises that you make. So part of that is saying like, I have 60 minutes that I'm going to give you and you're going to have my full attention. But then that way they know that as you're approaching the 60 minutes that they know to expect to wrap up. And then you are able to also kind of pace the conversation throughout to make sure that they're able to share what they need to share, but that you're also able to do the administrative things that you need to do within that 60 minutes of time.
Can I quickly add, as Nada was talking about road mapping and that's your case example, what that also is though, it's quite literally the opposite of what trauma is, right? Again, like we talked about with trauma, it's no one is expecting that. No one wakes up knowing it's going to happen. When we tell people what to expect, we're quite literally letting them know, right? It's the opposite, which is really powerful.
Yeah, and I think an other kind of dual goal that is accomplished through this is something that we just want to name is the power dynamic that might just be inherent in your conversation with someone. Attorneys, doctors, these are people that a lot of folks have a lot of biases and a lot of deference towards them. And so we want to kind of acknowledge that power dynamic by, again, setting people up in a situation of like, I'm not here holding all the cards, knowing what's going to happen, and you're just going to find out when I get to it. By sharing that agenda and road mapping what to expect and what they're going to expect of you, what your role is, what you can and cannot do, what you can and cannot share, you're helping to empower them and to really understand of like, hey, like, you know, you're going to know the information that I know, that you can make decisions here, you can make choices about how this goes, you're understanding my role and what I can and cannot do. And all of that is helping to dismantle those power dynamics and again, to earn trust in however much time that you have in it. So our next point here in what you're doing before the intake is also making it standard, right? So obviously there is going to be variation in the type of advice that you may provide folks depending on the situation that they're in, but kind of preparing yourself and having certain things that you're going to standardize. So for example, perhaps the way that you explain on confidentiality and privilege, right? Maybe a procedure that you have for yourself, like, you know, after every call, I'm going to send a follow-up list of resources that are local to our area. But just making sure that you're consistent and then perhaps not treating folks differently because of any implicit or explicit bias that you may have. And again, that standardization, I think, is also going to help you manage your own expectations. You're going to get in a rhythm and be able to really provide the key information that is necessary, and also allowing for the survivor to have time to share what they need to share. Identifying concerns and comfort. And this kind of overlaps a little bit into the fourth bullet, which is creating choice, but is different. So one of the things is, you know, depending on the format of the consultation, are you doing it virtually? Are you doing it via phone? Are you doing it in person? Are you being mindful of the considerations that come up with those? So for example, if you're doing it virtually, but there's a lot of activity going on in the background, are you acknowledging that and telling folks, you know, like, I assure you that even if you hear people in the background, like, this is a confidential space, no one can hear me, I have my headphones on or something else, telling them that, you know, if they hear silence, maybe if you're on the phone, that it might be quiet because you're taking notes, but you're still with them, you're still listening, asking if they have any accommodations that they may need, you know, do they need to take frequent bio breaks, that they can ask that if needed. But just really making sure that people are feeling comfortable is a really important way to, again, check in with them and level out those power dynamics so it's not all about on your schedule in your format. And then finally, creating choice. And this, again, kind of builds into the concerns and comfort of creating choice where possible. A lot of folks who are experiencing different types of violence often are feeling a loss of power and control over their situation. So by creating choice, we're sharing that control with them, right? Not giving it to them, because that would be a little paternalistic, but giving them choice in something as simple as, like, you know, do you have a preferred time of day for us to speak? And people have a lot, their work schedules aren't flexible. So if that's a possibility for you, the format that the consultation is taking place in, again, virtual, like a video call versus a phone call, again, allowing for breaks, asking them, again, like, where they want to start. Maybe they don't want to start chronologically, right? So finding opportunities, again, things that can be, that you can accommodate, right? Because, like, we don't want to ask and then say, no, thank you. But really trying to find those opportunities wherever possible, because they do restore agency to the person that you're speaking with and can make, again, a significant difference in building that trust. Benny, did you have anything to add for that slide? So now during the actual intake. So one of the things that comes up a lot is making sure that you're explaining why you may be asking certain information. So that could be something as simple, like, for example, in our line of work, we have to ask for a lot of demographic information because our grants and funders kind of make make us. And so that's one of the things I explain. That's like, hey, I'm going to ask you some information about your identity and your experiences. And that's not because we're going to share that with anyone. It will not impact your eligibility to receive these services. It's simply because our funders require us to do this to provide these services for free. So that is why I'm asking you. This is also absolutely comes up when we do law enforcement trainings. So for example, in a case of sexual assault, if a police officer has to ask, what were you wearing that night? Telling the officer the importance of explaining, why are you asking that question? Right? Because that question can land as very victim blaming of like, well, what were you wearing that night? Were you attracting unwanted attention that night? Or it could be like, oh, actually, we need to know what you were wearing because we need to be able to identify you in the video surveillance of that area, right? Wow, the whys really impact how that lands. And so if there are questions similar to that you may have to ask someone, thinking ahead of like, oh, that may be something that I might want to explain the context for which I'm asking. Asking permission, again, going back to those power dynamics, and not just kind of, going about it your way and just deciding to do certain things, asking permission if it's okay to kind of dive into talking about what happened. Being clear, again, trying to avoid using jargon. So many of us are so used to it, but really taking a moment to be as accessible in your language as possible, especially when it comes to legalese, and just, taking pauses to make sure that the person is understanding, looking for those verbal and nonverbal signs of understanding. And if there is that doubt, just being like, hey, is that landing for you, or just checking in and not depending again that folks are going to be very forthwith with their questions, because again, part of those power dynamics is that folks may be too intimidated to ask questions. So be sure to create the space for them to do so. And speaking of questions, mind your questions, right? I think something that's so important to being an attorney is that, our minds are often taking in so much information as folks are speaking, but we want to be really mindful of when we're posing questions and, that they may be interrupting the person that is speaking. That may, especially someone who has gone through a lot of trauma, we know that trauma impacts the ability to like chronologically store memory, and so it could be really throwing them off even further to be interrupting constantly. So as much as possible, being mindful of how you're interrupting, how you're pausing folks to clarify anything, to see if it's even necessary or if they can wait till the end. And so those types of considerations that are really important. If you think about it, all of this is just about being a basic respectful communicator. But again, knowing that it feels like a lot of pressure to have to receive certain information and throw back some advice at the same time while someone is perhaps speaking for a long time about things that feel important and difficult for them. And that's a lot to balance and take. Benny, I want to pause in case you had anything to add. So the next thing that we're going to do is see a short video on empathy and then one on validation techniques. And the reason that we're going to watch both of these is because they're going to provide great examples of what to do and what not to do. So just going to play it, not tell you which one is which, and we'll talk through it.
That it's not showing up for me. It says watch it on the presenter screen.
Let me just share my screen then. One moment, everyone. Can you see it now, Benny?
I see your background, your screen.
Apologies, everyone. Wouldn't be a webinar without some technical issues. Don't know.
Yeah, still your statement.
Okay. Actually, Benny, I'll just open this up. Well, Benny, I think in the meantime, while I'm pulling this up, do you want to just generally talk about the principles of trauma-informed language?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Nathan probably asked me this because it's probably my favorite topic to talk about, because I truly believe there is power in language. So how we phrase things, and I was actually telling Naida today that it's truly a lifelong process. How I spoke when I first started being an advocate back in 2014 to how I would phrase things now is completely different. So I always give that asterisk there. So we do have some examples that we've seen in our work, right? And I do want to mention intent versus impact. Kind of like with Nada talking even about questions of like, well, I'm asking because XYZ, but the impact that could have on someone could be extremely, extremely different. The same thing with language. So something that would happen, for example, when I worked at the hospital, I'll give this example, was a nurse would have to ask, like how many folks were involved, right? And instead of asking that, they would often sometimes say until we gave them feedback is, was it just one person or multiple people? And I wonder what y'all are thinking in that phrase, but when I first heard it, the word that stood out to me was just, okay? And how that can truly minimize, as if, oh, well, if it's one person, it wasn't so bad, versus if it was multiple people, then it's really, really bad, right? And these are thoughts that survivors often already have. And so when we have the power to break that apart, right, and phrase it, was it one person or more, right? Clearly asking the same thing, we're getting what we need, but being mindful of things that may minimize. Another word that often minimizes without us realizing is the word just. Just or only, right? Same thing. They often minimize a lot of things. And to be honest, I've actually done this in my personal life where I don't like to say the word just because I'm minimizing either myself or other people or their experiences. So I would say those are concrete things I would really, really watch out for. The other part of this is, and Aida likes to talk about this example, is I do think this often comes from us not knowing what terminology might be best for the person we're talking to or what they use. And often we do say, hey, why don't we mirror language, right? But use it the word, for example, gentleman, right? And I use this specifically because I do think most folks are trying to use certain words, again, to be like, oh, I don't know, that seems pretty neutral to me, or that sounds more respectful, right? And even if we separate that, gentle man, right? So really thinking about where that language comes from, how that person may perceive it. And again, we often suggest mirroring or using, again, neutral versus certain connotation of language. And then probably my biggest tip for this is we often are aiming to use person first language, right? And I think I was hinting at this at the beginning, part of that building rapport, part of that considering culture, right? All of that, the respect, all of that is based on the fact that folks who've experienced harm are people. Again, like I said, with interests, with dislikes, with hobbies, with families, with friends, etc. And person first language does this. I just used it right now. I said people who've experienced harm, right? Or an example I always say is, folks say a homeless person versus a person experiencing homelessness or a person who is unhoused. When we put quite literally the person first before those experiences, it shows more humanity in that they are the ones to be centered. My last tip for this that we really like to share is you're gonna make mistakes. We are all, the amount of mistakes and mess ups and oh my God, did that just come out of my mouth that I've had is endless, right? And the trick here to be trauma informed is not being perfect all the time. You're not gonna be. The trick here is recognizing it, and kind of like Nada was talking about before of asking for permission, that is applicable here. we go by saying, hey, can I actually rephrase that? Or, I'm sorry, can I try that again? Or, I don't know why I phrase it like that. My apologies. Is it okay if again, we start over, right? However we want to say that, I think acknowledging it is the key here versus trying to run past it, laughing it off, or saying that's not how I meant it. Because, right, again, for a lot of survivors, accountability is really important. Because most often, and y'all might be the experts of this, when you've had to talk to folks like, there may not be a legal claim, right? And in their minds, maybe like, oh, so there's nothing holding this person accountable, right? So when we can model that, like, hey, I can take accountability, I can apologize, right? It's really great. I saw something in the chat and it went away, but I think I saw, was it on person first language?
Or examples.
Yeah. I mean, there are so much in our society. Other ones is that I see often are with, for example, with mental illness. Some folks saying they're a schizophrenic versus they're a person diagnosed with schizophrenia, right? I will tell you, it does take more work. How I write, it takes really long. I'm not a succinct person because I often do this. I don't like when we're describing something, it might take longer to make sure we're describing, again, saying quite literally the person, they are someone who they have experienced X versus putting that experience before even talking about the person, if that makes sense. So like that example, homelessness example, and something at our organization is we're trying to really challenge the binary, for example, of folks who've experienced harm and folks who've caused harm. So I'm just modeling it right now. We, again, try to mirror language, but when we speak about things, we say just that, people who have caused harm versus maybe labeling someone abusers, perpetrators right off the bat, or only seeing them as that, right? So it takes some little bit of practice. And I would say it's okay to practice. And again, because you're going to practice, you're going to mess up, and then you're going to ask to try again, and it's going to be great. Oh, good. I hope that was helpful, Nina.
Right, y'all. Thank you for your patience. I think the video is finally working, so we'll go ahead and watch that briefly.
And why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Sinead, I think there's something up with your sound if you want to start over. Yeah, maybe try again.
So I
yes.
think, yeah, perfect. I think we're gonna skip the second video just in the interest of time. But the reason that we shared that is that I know that I often struggle as an attorney is feeling like, whoa, I'm an attorney, I'm not a social worker, I'm not a therapist. You know, I'm kind of there to provide the legal information. I'm not there to therapize. I also don't know if that's a word, but I think the importance of this is acknowledging that there might be moments where you feel uncomfortable, right? As a person, as an attorney, either way, and not know how to respond. And I think that, again, many of you are doing this because out of the goodness of your heart, you want to help folks, you want to support them. But at the same time, as humans, we have a discomfort with difficult conversations, with difficult topics. It's hard to hear about someone that has experienced something terrible and they're not coming to you for help. However, I think the importance in this is not centering your discomfort and then trying to problem solve, like, right, the legal equivalent of silver lining, like, oh, well, you know, at least you still have a house, like at least you are fine and you didn't have any physical injuries, or like at least etc. Right? Or like at least your claim, you know, you could file a civil claim instead. And so I think this was really helpful for me in being able to sit with, like, I didn't have to find a solution for folks. Like, I don't have to say the magical script that's going to comfort them and make them feel so good inside and walk away being like, oh, I made that person feel so much better, right? Like, being trauma informed doesn't mean that everyone's going to walk away happy, or they're going to feel like, oh my gosh, that was all the legal information I needed, right? Like, that's not realistic goal, and that also puts a lot of pressure on ourselves. And even if you have a consultation where maybe it resulted in someone's talking to you for half an hour and just like bearing their soul and telling you all the details that were not legally relevant, etc., and you just listen to them, that is a win. Like, that has so much value. That equals connection. That is what helps to overcome trauma in many instances, and that is something that feels attainable and can have such an important impact. Like Benny said, I don't know, even like we have so many examples of the terrible responses that folks have gotten from close members of like their family, of their network, like friends, coworkers. And so you are likely one of the first people that folks are coming to talk about things that have happened to them, and they're coming to you with advice and vulnerability of sharing something that is very, you know, personal and impactful. And so again, in that moment, even though you do have your attorney hat on and you're trying to provide legal advice, remember that that's not the only thing that you can offer. Just like validation goes a long way. So even for those calls that you're like, I just sat there and I listened to them and I didn't even really get to the nitty gritty of the legal advice I was going to give, like, that has value. And I think sometimes that's hard for us to remember as an attorney, that there's more to us than legal advice, and there's more to helping someone than, you know, getting through all the statutory analysis that you were going to provide. Benny, just checking to make sure that sounds good and that you can see the slides.
Yes.
Oh, awesome, great. So something that we want to do after the intake is review the information. Oh, sorry, seeing Lizzie's note. For those who are interested in the second video, we're happy to send a link in the chat, but if you don't mind doing that, sending a YouTube link so you all can check that out later. And thanks so much. That's a great idea. So something that is important for afterwards is reviewing what you talked about during the conversation, kind of doing like a bullet point summary. Folks may be very overwhelmed by the information that you've given them, especially, you know, if they got more technical. Again, like, hopefully we avoided technical language and jargon, but just reviewing, like, okay, you know, we talked today about the statute of limitations, and I told you that the criminal statute of limitations may have expired for your claim. However, there's a possibility of exploring options through the civil court system. And that's something that, you know, we didn't have time to talk about today, but we talked about perhaps like I can send my list of resources and you can connect with a civil attorney to help you. So like, just again, summarizing what you talked about, talking about next steps, even when that doesn't necessarily mean a conversation with you, right? Like you should have set the stage at the beginning to make clear, like, is this a one-time thing? Is there a possibility for a follow-up conversation? Again, managing the expectations of what you can and cannot do. And that may look differently for each one of you. It may look differently for a certain case, but hopefully you set those expectations at the beginning. So maybe the next steps is like, what you can expect from me is a follow-up email with that list of resources that we talked about, or what you could expect from me is that I will go back and talk to the partners at the firm to see if it's possible for us to represent you on this matter, etc. But tell them what to expect and also be clear. Like, again, you don't have to say like, you'll hear from me on Monday at 6 p.m. Don't do that if you can't guarantee it. Again, to Benny's point about building trust, don't make promises you can't keep. And sometimes that may be like, you know what, I'm in trial this week. I'm not really sure what day I'm going to be able to get back to you this week, but I promise that by early next week at the latest, you'll hear back from me. Again, work within your capacity, but be honest about what you can and cannot do and when they should expect to hear from you. And finally, expressing thanks. A lot of folks will kind of expect that we're the ones that are gonna be thanked, but also thanking folks for sharing again something that is probably deeply personal and deeply impactful. And it takes a lot of vulnerability to be talking to a stranger via video call, phone, and sharing all these details. And so just thanking them for being willing to share those details with you is very important. And again, just dismantling those power dynamics and validating that like that was a hard thing for them to do. I mean, was there anything else you wanted to share? Okay, great. So now we'll get to the fun part. Fun in the sense that, you know, hopefully this will answer a lot of questions. So before we get into it, just like a couple of practice tips that Benny's going to go over for you all to be thinking about as you're reading the examples that we're going to cover.
Yes. Thanks, Lizzie, for the spoiler. It is from Inside Out, and I stand by my statement. It is one of probably the best examples we have of validation. So empower, that's actually part of Volari's tagline, right? Empowering survivors. Same, I love that movie. And Nathan touched upon this throughout of like those opportunities for choice. And kind of like trauma-informed language, I think this is more of a practice. It honestly may be like, hey, let me take a step back before my next consultation or call or video call. What are those areas that maybe I may be overlooking? Is it the time of day, right? For in-person, I think there's a little bit more, but even if maybe it's even asking call or video call, right? Maybe they want to see your face, like maybe they want to see it's like a human, right? So just thinking about things. What are some opportunities I can offer? Choices. Do you want to take a break in the middle? If I'm giving you 60 minutes, I'm going to stop us at 30 just to see if you need a bio break, or hey, let me know if you need a bio break before, right? Things like that. Always ask. With names, it should be, sometimes we always assume like, oh, this is the name I'm given, but even asking like, hey, how can I refer to you? What feels best for you, right? So always seeking those opportunities. Again, I think often we're like, but does that really make an impact? It truly, yes, I said bio break just for I guess it sounds because it's shortened for biology, but yeah, like going to the bathroom, hydrating, right? Yes, no need to use that, but that's what we call it. So really, like I was saying, yes, thinking of all of those opportunities that we can create. And again, we may think it's so small, what's the impact? They're not even going to care. Maybe they might not. They might be like, I don't care. That's great. And someone else might care, right? And also, when I always say it's the opposite of trauma is if we have the power, right, to have a survivor have a positive experience, a non-harmful experience, then we could totally take that opportunity. And even if it's, quote, small, like asking, do you prefer a phone call or a video call? To them, it's, I have a choice, or I can say no to a video call. I can say no to a phone call, etc. We talked about road mapping, so I'm not going to get hung up on that again. Again, right? Opposite of trauma, telling people what to expect. I loved everyone in the chat kind of noticing you may be doing this in other areas of your life. You may be doing this with your family, or maybe doing this with your friends. You may be like, oh yeah, that's pretty standard. And I think sometimes we have the tools. I'm like, oh wait, I can bring those tools into this other aspect of my life that I do that I may not think requires it. So just amping up road mapping. Grounding strategies is my favorite. I am a licensed trauma therapist, so I have worked with folks. So that's a lot of where I use some grounding strategies, but I also use them as an advocate even before I had the term grounding strategies, right? So what typically happens, and that activation, like we talked about, could be telling you more about their experience of harm or trauma. Or it could be, again, that overlap where we're like, wait, what's happening? The pen's not working, really, right? So it could be really anything that could potentially activate someone. Until we ground, and when I say activate, is often when there is some trauma cue, right, activation, we're not in the present. We're either being pulled back to the past, to typically a traumatic memory, like, oh, I'm in danger, it's not safe, it's reminding me of what happened, or to the future. What if? What if they're going to tell me they're not going to take my case? What if no one believes me? What if this makes it worse? What if I start crying? Right, et cetera, et cetera. And we've all experienced this in different degrees. Grounding is connecting to the present. The here and now, I'm on the phone seeing this person, I'm going to let them know, right? Like here and now. Typically, that's not where the danger is. Typically, again, right, if that's true. So grounding allows people to connect to that. Now, I want to give you a couple of things. Naida said you will get a handout with this, but I want to name one of the quickest ways to ground connect to the present is through our senses. Hey, why don't we take a pause? And do you mind looking around wherever you are? Can you tell me 5 colors that you see? This is because I want us to pause for a second and just connect to the here and now. We're going to take a little break if that's okay. I always ask, I've never been turned down. I actually mean that, never. There's not been one person who has said no. If they say no, that's okay, move on. But this is something we can try, right? Smell is actually the quickest. So again, right, it depends what they have near them. We don't know, versus if it was our office, we would maybe have more control over that. Or I like to call it the 5 senses game. And I'm like, 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can feel tactilely, right? 2 things you can smell, or 1 thing you can taste. Even if the answer is, I taste nothing, I'm like, great, you took the second to figure it out, right? Breathing, another huge grounding. If our exhale is longer than our inhale, it will slow down our heart rate. If you have I have a Garmin or an Apple Watch, you will see your heart rate slow down. If even by 2 seconds, inhale for 4, exhale for 6, pretend you're blowing out a candle, right? Naida talked about healthy boundaries, and when we're road mapping, we're creating that boundary. Active listening is amazing and it's important. And I think a good way to describe it is to not do what we all typically do, which is it my turn to talk yet? Can I? And that often comes from like, oh, you said this thing and I have a perfect response for this. I want to tell you this thing, or I'm ready to give you my answer. But it's holding that space, right? It doesn't even have to be words. It doesn't, nonverbals. That's why maybe they want a video call so that they can see, they can just like, oh, you're here. You're again in the present with me, right? And checking assumptions. Y'all, we all have them. I trust people more when they tell me they have biases than when they're like, I have none, because we all have them. And just checking them, being aware of them, right? Like maybe some of our past experiences are going to come up, we may think that's not what I would do. Why did you do that? In our head, right? Why? So as long as we're aware of that, we're better prepared to work with folks.
All right, everyone, we're finally at the part where we're going through examples. And so for those who cannot see the slides, I'm just going to read it out loud. So in this example, we're looking how to empathetically set boundaries around client communication. So you get an intake and you quickly realize that the claim falls outside of the statute of limitations. You've tried to explain that, but the survivor you're speaking to keeps interrupting you. They're saying they don't understand why you can't help them and are also talking about the challenges they've been facing in their life, for example, housing, food access, and they've been talking for 30 minutes. What do you do? Invite anyone to come off mute, or if you want to put stuff in the chat. And actually, and if you're joining us via AHA slide, you're also able to put an answer via AHA slide so that folks can also see. And I see that folks are taking. Just to repeat again, shorten the scenario. Someone's been talking for a long time. They keep interrupting you. They don't know why you can't accept, why you can't help them. They're telling you about a lot of things that are going on in their life that feel really pressing, feel really urgent, but you're not able to get a word in. So what do you do? Gently interrupt, acknowledge all the things going on, but explain that your focus is relatively narrow, even ask them to take a breath. And listen to them talk and then explain the legal limitations. So again, the interest of time, I'm gonna kind of talk through some of these and I'll read one more from Veronica. Okay, sorry to interrupt you. I'm so sorry you went through such a horrible thing. What you went through was not okay. Unfortunately, under the law, the deadline to file the suit was passed. I wish I could bring this case for you. Yeah, these are all really great considerations. I think this is one of those scenarios where, again, it's so helpful to have set boundaries at the beginning, right? To have told them, like, this is how much time we have to talk, because that also sets you up for a situation where you should not have gotten to 30 minutes of someone just talking at you, right? Like, I maybe at the 15-minute mark would gently ask them to pause and say, like, you know, Benny, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I see that we have 15 minutes left with our time, and I just want to make sure that I can get to all the questions that you had for me today. So if you don't mind, I'm just gonna, you know, explain this part that we had talked about us discussing today. Or again, reiterating that, you know, like, I know it's really disappointing that your claim falls outside of the statute of limitations. As I mentioned, there might be some alternatives that we can talk through today. Those aren't things that I can necessarily help you with, but I'm happy to send you a list of referrals that I commonly share with clients, right? So again, establishing those boundaries of what you can and cannot do. Again, hopefully you're not waiting 30 minutes before realizing, like, oh my gosh, I can't get a word in. You can pause people. Again, and if you have set the expectation that you have a certain amount of time, you can pause people with the explanation that you want to be able to finish the conversation and give them the information that you need. And it's, I think, also something that Vico has also mentioned is the importance of acknowledging and like validating that they're going through many difficult things, right? Is really important as well, and not just be like, hey, I'm running out of time, so we really need to wrap this up. But yes, the importance of road mapping. And so for the second scenario that we have is how to recommend support outside of legal representation. So the intake that you're doing doesn't seem to have any valid legal claims, and you're asking, like, how do I recommend mental health support or similar type of resources? You have that kind of conversation. Next slide for people to be able to answer. And because Benny says that I'm very tricky sometimes with my hypotheticals, I will give a heads up that this is a tricky one. So really reflect on this question.
Naida, can I ask you to just read it one more time since it's not up on that slide anymore?
Yes, of course. And so this second one is that you're doing an intake and someone doesn't really seem to have any valid or viable legal claims, and you're trying to think like, what I really need to do here is recommend a mental health support type resource or something similar. So how do you bring that up? How do you have that conversation? Thank you, Benny. Benny just added it to the chat as well. Folks are typing. Thank you. I don't unless they ask. Jocelyn, you are right on the money. Jocelyn, that was kind of a spoiler. I didn't anticipate it being so early on, but wonderful. So, Jocelyn, if you want to come off mute at any time, I'd love to hear why you said that. But in case you don't, what Jocelyn is highlighting here is right. Never in the hypothetical. Oh, Jocelyn, wonderful. Do you want to share why you said that?
Because I think it would be pretty presumptuous for me to assume that this person has mental issues, and if they don't believe they need help or aren't seeking that from me, I can't give them that anyway.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Jocelyn, this goes right to what we said at the very beginning, right? Like understanding what the person's goals are and not implanting your own, right? You may be thinking maybe you have a background in mental health resources or something, or you have a degree. That doesn't matter. You're going with whatever that person has identified of like, hey, Naida, I'd like your help with this. And you're staying there, even if you're like, oh, they really should consider reporting to the police. They really should consider going to therapy. That's not on you to be offering that or to be implanting, again, like really staying within what the client has what the intake has identified as their goals and what they want to talk about. And it can be hard to resist that, but it's really about centering like what they're wanting from you and not what you want for them. And that can be really difficult at times. But again, like if you want to talking about that list of resources that we talked about earlier and make it standard, right? And say like, okay, for everyone that I talk to, I'm just going to share that list of resources. Maybe that includes mental health resources, but then that's up to them if they decide to contact them. And we're not picking and choosing who we're like, oh, you should go consult a mental health resource, right? Because that could be a trauma cue for a lot of people. That can make people feel like maybe you don't think that they have credibility or the capacity to be bringing these claims. And so it can be very complicated. And so while a lot of folks may have this kind of reaction out of trying to help and be supportive of someone, we really want to make sure that we're listening to what folks are looking for from us. So again, sorry for the interest of time, we'll go to our last scenario here. And so this is a scenario that is discussing how to strike the balance between legal ethics and client comfort. So how should I advise clients when they want third parties, for example, a spouse or a partner or a parent, to sit in on the consultation? Or telling you like, hey, maybe this is a 21-year-old college student and they're like, I really, really want my mom to be on this conversation. I'm really overwhelmed. She'll know what to ask, etc. So what would you do? So just to repeat the scenario again, that you're doing a consultation and it's a college student. I didn't even put this in the slide, but let's say it's a college student and they really want their parent to be in the conversation. They're 21, they want their parent there, or it's someone that's like, I really want my spouse to be there. Alan says it happens all the time to him. And he explains that they may be losing the attorney-client privilege by doing so, but it is their choice. Wonderful. Thank you, Alan. Again, you all are getting this right from the start. I love it. So I'll let some other folks chime in here, but what I love about Alan's response, right, is that it's ultimately their choice. And as attorneys, we may be like, kicking our feet up in the air and throwing our hands up and be like, no, that's not a good idea. But ultimately, our role is to explain the pros and cons of decisions, right? Like, we're there to provide information, but ultimately it is their decision. There may be so much that we're unaware of why they're making that decision. Like maybe that person has an experience of having panic attacks unless they have that support person there. And for them, like, the risk of any like negative legal consequence is significantly outweighed by the stability that that support person provides them, right? And that's not our place to make that call about whether that's ultimately the best decision or not. Like, we may have our opinions about how that will impact their legal case, but ultimately they are the expert of their own lives, and they are the ones that should make that decision. We provide information, but we're taking their lead. Veronica gave her sample response of, I understand that you want to bring your parent. If you feel that's absolutely necessary for them to be there, feel free to bring them. Be aware that this will waive your attorney-client privilege during this meeting, and explain what that means. Yes, exactly. Wonderful. Like, it's not that we're just going to say like, okay, sure, period, right? We have a responsibility to explain the impact of that, but you can do that while still centering the client's choice. Wonderful. Now, with that being said, just wanted to open it up for questions. Y'all have been so wonderful. I really appreciate your engagement, but want to make sure that we are covering all the concerns that you have. And in case we haven't done that today, this is now the time to bring them up of maybe some challenges that you're facing, or just sharing comments and any tips for anyone else. I know that folks have done that throughout the presentation today, and that has been wonderful as well. And still open for questions, but I do want to leave up our contact information both for the Legal Network for Gender Equity and then for Laura in the next slide, so folks can see that as well as you're marinating on your questions. Thanks, Rebecca, adding on to that last example. Rebecca says that caution them that the attorney-client privilege may not apply if their choice. Same. It can be a red flag when it's a spouse or a parent of an adult. We often say we need to hear from the potential client, not the spouse or parent, right? That's a great point, Rebecca, that we want to make sure that we're still centering like who the actual client is and deferring to their choice and not the support person there. But again, if they want to have them there, that's different. But being mindful of those dynamics as well.
May I ask if this presentation could be shared with the participants? There was so much information, and I was frantically and furiously writing down all of the nuggets of wisdom, and I'm concerned that maybe I haven't captured all of it.
Yes, Nina, thank you so much for asking. The slides, recording, and a handout that kind of covers some of the top level takeaways will also be provided. And Lizzie says likely within the next week.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so there's a link that's linked in the chat where we have all of our webinars that are recorded, and also we periodically send out newsletters to Legal Network members. We'll make sure that in our next newsletter there's also a link to this recording, and you can always email the Legal Network at nwlc.org email address if you are not seeing things or are not receiving things that you think you should be. But I'm really glad. Thanks for your participation, Nina, and interest in seeing the recording. And sorry, Veronica has now asked a question.
Yes, and thank you, Veronica. This is a great question. Do you think it would be appropriate to suggest a client takes a breath in a stressful moment, like if they're crying? I think it definitely is appropriate. It's all about how you do it. And I think what's great about some of the grounding strategies that Benny was sharing, right, is that, again, going back to the like, I'm an attorney, not a therapist, this feels overwhelming, but I've had clients have panic attacks outside of courtrooms. And so these tools are really helpful in just like helping to de-escalate someone either because they're crying or because they're having a panic attack or anything. It's all about how you're doing it. And like Benny said, very rarely has someone not wanted to engage in a type of breathing exercise. It's the tone with which it's brought up, right? If someone tells you, like, if you just imagine maybe you're having a heated discussion with a friend or a spouse and they're like, all right, calm down, take a breath. Like, that is a very different tone than inviting someone like, it sounds like you're having a really hard time. Like, can I invite you to just like engage in this exercise with me and then we can continue our conversation? again, the tone, your body language is so different. If it's coming from a place of exasperation and you're like, I need to get this intake over with, that comes across and it does not have the same effect and will also likely not de-escalate the situation. Thank you so much, Veronica, for asking that. Benny, did you want to add anything to that question or that answer?
No, that's perfect. I think asking versus suggesting. I think, would you like to take a pause, or we can absolutely take a pause if you would like. And I want to uplift Carla. Yes, if we had more time and we would absolutely dive more into trauma. This is very common for like ghosting. I would say definitely not personal. The main reason we see is kind of like I was talking about, that overlap. We may be that overlap. Even I had a client who told me, every time I see you, I think of what happened to me, because I responded to her at the hospital hours after she had been sexually assaulted, right? So like we may be that person where they're like, oh, if I call them back, I'm going to remember what happened. I'm going to have to talk about this, even if we're not asking direct questions. So definitely not personal. It's quite common because of the trauma being experienced and how the brain is processing their interactions with us often. Not always, but that's often the case.
Any other questions? I'm also putting our information in the chat to contact Laura in case you all can't see the slides. Any other questions, or again, just tips that you want to share with others? You're that person for the client. What can you do to minimize the pain that comes from interacting with them if seeing you reminds them of that painful memory? Oh, great one. Benny, do you want to take that?
Yeah, well, one, no, again, nothing personal. We can't really, like, I couldn't help that, right? And I think the empowering and choice is really important. So, for example, maybe that is a reason they either want to see you face to face, like virtual, right? Video versus phone call, or the opposite. That's the thing. We never know what actually may be better for someone. Like you would think, oh, they may actually not want video, but for some, it's like, no, I need to see because then I feel like it's not the person or something else like that. Mm-hmm. So I think leaning on the choice aspect is important. Leaning on the empowerment is important. And the what to expect. I will say you can do every one of those steps and they may still ghost you, right? So having those skills and tools that are going to be in your handout are going to be really helpful, because if they do become activated, if they do share something, you can be like, hey, we can pause. Can we try ABC or what have you?
Then Carla just asked, what's the best way though to get them to call me back? Just wait until they're ready. Carla, this is something that I struggle with a lot. And I think goes to like those boundaries a little bit that you set with yourself, as well as like establishing how much time you have to take, is also establishing like how much you can or cannot do for someone. And like, this is one of those instances where like you're ready and willing to help someone, but they're just not calling you back, and knowing that like you have to let go, like that is not on you. You're able to help if they contact you, but that's their choice. And maybe, for example, they have a housing issue and they don't have somewhere to sleep tonight, and like that feels more pressing than a legal claim. And you know what, that is extremely valid. Or for the same reason that many domestic violence survivors, you know, kind of initiate a claim and then go back because they're facing a high risk of physical danger from the person that they were trying to file the claim against. So like, we never know what's going on in a person's life, you know, either in this setting or anything else. And so there may be reasons that are very, very valid for them not reaching out. And I think that helps to remind me that like, it's not about me, you know, it's about what's going on for them. And again, like once they're ready and they want to, I'll be here.
All amazing questions.
Great questions. Well, everyone, it has been such a pleasure speaking with you. As we've mentioned before, we have a handout that accompanies this just so that you can kind of, you know, if you want to have by your side while you're doing intakes, just some quick reminders, some quick pointers, some examples of some grounding exercises that, again, are very manageable, even for those of us who aren't therapists. But all those resources will be circulated. And of course, if you have any more questions or concerns, feel free to reach out to either of the teams. We're happy to hear from you. Thank you.
And I just wanted to end first by saying thank you so much, Benny and Naida. This, your insight on this topic is really incredible, and your knowledge is so practical and impactful. And to the attendees, thanks so much for your engagement and all of your excellent questions. Can I just ask you to go to that other slide with our information? I'm just going to make one final plug. So if anyone here is not part of the legal network, just an ask to please consider joining. And you can find out more about that at the link that's shown here, and Danny can add that link to the chat. As a reminder, we provide free legal consultations for people who've experienced sex discrimination at work, at school, or while receiving healthcare. So if you are an attorney who practices in any of those areas, please do consider joining, or if you are already in the network, please consider sharing that link with other colleagues who you think would be a good fit. And then please follow us on social media, in addition to Volare, to make sure to follow them as well, because they are fabulous, but to get updates about our work and resources. And yes, as a reminder, all of the slides, the recording, the handout that we've referenced will all be on our website and shared in our upcoming newsletter. But thank you so much to everyone who was a part of this. It was really fabulous.
And Lizzie, if I could just remind folks, you should have just seen a poll pop up via Zoom asking for feedback. So if y'all wouldn't mind just taking a couple moments, I think it's probably be less than a minute that it'll take you to do. The feedback is really helpful for everyone involved in the planning of this. Again, we want to make sure that we're really responsive to any of the concerns or challenges that you've been having, and that you felt like this was helpful, and again that you'll use the tools, and that you felt like your questions are answered. And if not, we want to hear from you on how it could have been better. Thank you again so much for taking the time to do that and for coming today.
Yes, thanks everyone. Thank you. Have a good one.